Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week's edition of This Week in Villanova Football. This Week in Villanova Football is sponsored in part by the American Academy of Hospital Medicine, advancing the cause of excellence in hospital medicine. Studio 042, Super Business Printer Studio 042.com. And by Athletic Squared, a platform that lowers the cost of youth sports training and empowers all college athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness. Go to athletessquared.co. Info at athletessquared.co. Well, Mark, in football, I hope this makes sense. You can look beautiful when you win. You can look ugly when you win. In this case, I think Villanova was beautifully ugly this past weekend. The weather was not very nice, but the Cats only found a way to win, but did so in impressive fashion, 21-0. Mark, I think this is a case where the coaches quickly figured out how the formula would go to win this game, and they put together a very impressive performance on both sides of the ball.
Ed, first of all, speaking of ugly, what is this with weather and Villanova home games?
Could you and by the way, just so everybody knows, as Mark and I taped this during the week, it's been beautiful fall weather the last couple. I mean, the kind of October fall weather you just want to bottle up with. You get that breeze going, get
Yeah.
the hoodie on. I mean, it's perfect fall weather during the week. Yes, I'm saying this for the sake of the fans. I'm hoping we'll get a little better weather as we get through the rest of the season.
Ed, I was talking on the conference call. The CAA does a great job with the Rob Washburn and everybody every week on a conference call, and they have all the coaches. And I asked Mark Ferrante, and he's been around a few years at this Villanova program, a few decades. Have you ever seen a better defensive performance than this? And maybe he could come up with one, but he couldn't at the moment. I mean, they held Elon, and remember, Ed, this was a team that was 3-0 in the CAA coming in, the first place team. They held them to 99 yards. 99 yards.
Pretty incredible. And Mark, I got a sense the game seemed to swing early. We know Villanova got off to the fast start, but Brandon Bell had that stop on 4th and 2 when Elon was driving, and I think they were at the Villanova 41, 42-yard line. And Bell had a terrific game with 7 tackles, makes that stop.
Yeah,
I think that kind of set the tone early on how the day was going to go.
I agree with you, and they got every big stop then. And how about on the first of three, the touch the 50-yard? I don't know if it was the first, but the 50-yard touchdown by TD Iodojae when it was 4th and 1, and he went for it, and there was no hesitation to go for it. And by the way, Ed, that run, he was never touched. I mean, for 50 yards. He would have made that in two-hand touch and flag football, whatever you want. That was just a tremendous blocking, and the O line did a masterful job on Saturday.
It was what I like to call a John Madden game where you're talking about the muck and the mud, and you're right. The guys in the trenches were just terrific. Let's praise that offensive line a little bit. That second touchdown, there's great speed, but the offensive line, there was just a wall of blue that sealed the inside. And then you take the speed, you combine that. You're right. He was not touched, but I think a lot of credit goes to the O line. This is a game where we'll talk about how well Villanova ran the ball, but sometimes you run the ball that well, there's a very big reason. The men up front, who have been good all year, probably played their best game of the season.
I would agree with that, Ed. And on one of those other short TDI Odorojai touchdowns, Nick Torres, number 79, just blocked out an entire side. I mean, it was you're right. It was a clinic, and I think it was more impressive considering the fact that this was against the first place team.
And there was another moment in that first half where Connor Watkins threw an interception. And he finished 3 for 10. But again, we're talking about the elements and how the game plan was. It didn't take long for the coaches to say, well, we know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And again, you've got certainly a very selfless leader in Watkins who said, hey, we got to run the football. And we'll get to how he did his part as well. So I think the coaches figured out pretty fast how they were going to win this game. You mentioned this is a first place team that was unbeaten in the conference. Villanova took control of this game. We talked about fast starts, Mark. When they've been winning, as they have nearly the whole year, they get off to a quick start. And I think it was a knockout punch early, especially with the way they did it with some of this blocking and some of these fast touchdown runs that I don't think the Phoenix were able to recover from early on.
No, and the Phoenix, we talked last week about how they've been playing three quarterbacks. The guy Downing, who was their top guy, was not available. So they went with the two others, a running quarterback, a passing quarterback, and it just didn't matter. I mean, it just didn't matter. And I don't think it would have mattered if Downing were there either, to be honest with you.
And we've talked about how there have been a couple of situations this year where Villanova would see different quarterbacks. And even if they're not their top quarterbacks, it's always a difficult adjustment to make. The defense did that. We talked about Aidoo Ajayi with his touchdown runs. Three, I guess you could call him the closer. He had that one long run for the second run, but he got some help because some of his fellow running backs slash quarterbacks ran pretty well too. Isaiah Ragland, hello freshman, 126 yards. Talk about a coming out party. And Watkins finished with 125 yards, Mark. That's the first time since 1977 that the Cats had two players rush for over 125 yards in the same game. We've talked about Villanova's depth. I think is certainly the backfield, and of course the running quarterback certainly had that on display with the running game this past weekend.
This is an interesting story. Villanova's going to have a pleasant dilemma. D. Will Barley didn't play. That's why Ragland got so much time. Now, Mark Ferrani said he maybe could have played, but they felt with the bye coming up and everything, that just be cautious. So D. Will, who's had just a great season, didn't play. So they bring in Ragland, and Ragland gets 126 yards, and today was named the CAA Rookie of the Week. That's all great, and he looked great. He had some explosion to him. That was the third game he's played this year for Villanova. We talked earlier in the year about the coaches didn't know whether they were going to redshirt him. You could play him 4 games and then decide on that. I asked Mark Ferrani. He basically seemed to suggest that Farley's back. He doesn't know if they want to, waste the season on him. But I'm telling you what, Ragland, I mean, he adds to the strength of the team already. And as a freshman, he certainly doesn't look overwhelmed by the moment. And they did not lose anything when he's in there. So that's going to be a pleasant decision that these coaches have to make.
Yeah, very little tears of sympathy like the rain on Saturday coming down from opposing coaching staff. It's a great dilemma for Villanova to have. Obviously, a lot of times tie goes to the upperclassmen. I think Mark Ferrante and his staff, their thoughts are what are the best chances to win. Of course, the advantage is everybody seems to give them a best chance to win. And again, Mark, we talked before, Watkins didn't have to throw much in this game, only completed 3 passes. You're going to have better weather days than the one on Saturday. We've already seen Watkins be able to put up some big passing numbers as well. I think if you combine the balance Villanova has offensively, maybe as good as any team in the CAA.
There's no question. And Ed, we've said this time and time again. It's not just because they only attempted 10 passes. Their passing game has not hit its stride yet. I mean, there's another level for that to go too. And they're a good passing team. It's just sometimes when you're so good running the ball, it kind of obscures the other areas. But they are an excellent passing team. I could see a time in a week where they're going to need to put it up 30 plus times, and they're going to need to really throw the ball. But if you don't need to, why do it? And especially on a lousy day, they can run the ball as well as anybody. With that offensive line and the depth at running back, it's a great combo.
Yeah, and depth at receiver too when that passing game does get going. Depth is certainly not a problem with this Villanova team. That's going to serve them well. And Mark, the bye's coming up as you mentioned, but even so, you've got guys who get their time on the field, either the backs or the receivers, but because they're so deep, I think they're a little more fresh week in and week out. I think that's the other advantage the depth has. Yes, every team has injuries. Players are sore after every game, every week, no matter how much they play, but maybe they're a little less banged up than some other teams because they don't need to have a running back carry 20 times. They're not depending on one receiver to make 8 catches a game. And I think that's another little hidden element here that might serve the Cats after the bye.
It is, Ed, but even remember, running back is such a tough position. Remember, Jalen Jackson missed some time this year, and none of these backs are overloaded with carries. He missed time. Now, D. Will Barley missed time. So even spreading out the carries, not making anybody be a 30 carry a game guy, you still get injuries at that position because you just get popped so much. They're just very fortunate to have as good as depth as anybody in the CAA there.
Yeah, the Cats now 3-1 in conference play, 5-2 overall. as they head into the bye with 4 games on the horizon after the bye. Mark, this was big for a lot of reasons. One, of course, you never like a loss to linger, period. But when you're going into a bye, it can sting a little longer, and it's tough to
Yeah.
kind of wash it away and flush it and move forward. They go into the bye week certainly feeling pretty happy about this game. And, also you mentioned Elon unbeaten in the conference. I don't think a lot of people would have said that by this time of season when you looked at the preseason prognosticators. But considering, and we'll get to the CA, how tight things are, it was almost imperative that not only Villanova got a win to give Elon its first conference loss, but the Cats keep only one loss in the loss column in the conference, which is essential with the way the standings are packed.
I mean, right. We're at this stage where there's only one unbeaten team now, and that's Delaware. And I don't think, and this is to take nothing away from the Blue Hens, but I still think some of their better opponents are yet to come. So it is just wild. Villanova, Richmond, Elon are all 3-1. I mean, it's going to be a wild race, and we all know with Villanova ending the season at Delaware. I mean, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but you could envision that maybe that could be for the CAA title.
I think Villanova and Delaware fans are allowed to get ahead of themselves. So it's a matchup we always look forward to anyway, the Battle of the Blue. But it would be really exciting to see if that was for all the proverbial marbles of the conference. And Mark, you mentioned Delaware, the only team with conference play unbeaten. The Blue Hens are 3-0. Nova's 3-1. Richmond's 3-1. Elon's 3-1. William and Mary's 2-1. Albany's 2-1. They suffered their first loss this past week of the conference. Monmouth, who you alluded to last week, they're 2-1. So you look at it, there's 6 teams in this conference with 1 loss. And then you have a decent team like Rhode Island among the teams with 2 losses. Of course, Villanova beat them. There's a lot still to be sorted out. And I think this conference, while we thought it was strong and thought it was balanced, is a little more tighter at the top than we envisioned in the middle of October.
Yeah, and Ed, we didn't even mention New Hampshire, who everybody considered preseason, and it still might happen as the second best team in the CAA, and New Hampshire is 1-2. So uh, uh, a big win last week, though, for the Wildcats there over Albany. So this conference could go 7, 8 deep. It's crazy, and that's why that was such an important win for Villanova on Saturday.
A huge win. And you mentioned that win for New Hampshire, 38-31 over Albany. Rhode Island lost to Richmond. There's another team that, oh, by the way, they're not doing too badly either when you look at the standings. The Spiders, we haven't even talked about them this year. They're 4-3 overall. They're 3-1 in conference play. And Mark, that was a big win over Rhode Island because we've talked all during the year how what a solid team the Rams are. Villanova beat them. We expect them to stay in the hunt. And along comes Richmond. So you're seeing I don't want to use the term any given Saturday, parody from the any given Sunday for football. We've certainly seen that in the NFL, but I think it's more evident this year, and it's made for a very exciting conference. It's going to be interesting when the time comes for selection day, as far as the postseason, how much that's going to be considered.
Yeah, it's funny how deep this conference is. People are saying, Rhode Island, they're 2-2. Remember, Ed, before they faced Villanova, they were ranked. And even after they lost to Villanova, they remained ranked. So I mean, it's just great depth. So Villanova, people. Mark Ferrante was asked, "Well, you got this momentum. Do you really want to have a bye right now?" And but they're a football team. Any football team at this stage at 7 games is banged up, and you'll welcome the time off. No, there's no doubt about that.
And by the way, Monmouth 61-10 over Hampton. The folks in West Long Branch, the Hawks, having a pretty good year as well. Looking ahead to this week, we mentioned Richmond. They're at North Carolina A&T. Monmouth plays at Elon. There's another one of those interesting head-to-head matchups. Delaware is going to be favored to stay unbeaten in the league. They're at Hampton next week. And New Hampshire, again, with 2 losses, they're at Stony Brook, and they're expected to win that game. Another intriguing matchup, we were just talking about Rhode Island and Albany. They play each other up in Albany this weekend. And then you've got William and Mary hosting Townsend as well in Maine at Campbell. And Mark, you mentioned New Hampshire, who I agree with you. I still think it's going to be heard from. Even if they were to run the table, they've got 2 conference losses. They could still find themselves, at least as far as the conference standings, on the outside looking in, just because there are so many teams ahead of them right now.
Oh, they very well could. By the way, I think 2 losses could still get you in in the FCS playoffs, but that's a whole other question. And next week we'll have Sam Herder from Hero Sports talking about FCS and the playoffs and all and the CAA and everything like that. But you're right. Some of these are like elimination games, Ed. Like Monmouth at Elon. I mean, don't you think the loser of that is really got some ground to cover? Then it'll be the second loss for whoever loses that game, and you know, what's the old saying? It's getting early late, or it's getting late
Yeah,
early.
it's getting late early, that's for sure. And you know what? In this conference now, 2 losses in October, as you alluded to, could be what dooms you, just because there's so much ground to make up. There's so many other teams. It's always the plus minus when you see these head to heads. Okay, somebody in that matchup is going to get a loss in the game between Elon and Monmouth. On the other hand, somebody's going to continue with only one loss in the conference, and so it'll start to sort itself out a little bit. Uh, just to back on Delaware, the only team that's unbeaten right now. We mentioned they're at Hampton this week. Then they're at Towson again. Of course, we're looking ahead to the end of the season. So the Blue Hens, they're also at Campbell. It seems, with the respect to the teams they're playing, they do have one of the easier schedules before the Villanova game. So that's something to keep in mind. They could very well, if the numbers don't lie, still be undefeated in the conference play when the Cats see them in the last game of the season.
I'd be surprised if they weren't. I really would. And they've obviously, not just because they're the only unbeaten team, but they're obviously right now the team to beat. And by the way, it's not like this is the first time for them. They've gone a few rodeos before. You know, they're a perennial contender. So nothing for Coach Party's team is surprising.
Yeah, I think generations of Villanova and Delaware fans are well aware with each other's success, and not surprised it would be, again, Mark Ferrani saying, don't look at it. It's fun to look ahead to think, boy, what if Villanova and Delaware was for the conference title, or at least for a share of the conference title? That would be exciting. But Villanova has some work to do beforehand. Let's just take a look ahead at what lies ahead after the bye. After the bye week, the Cats will be back home. Let's hope for good weather on October 28th, hosting Stony Brook. That's a 2 o'clock game at Villanova Stadium. Again, Stony Brook towards the bottom of the conference this year. And then we were just talking about New Hampshire. The Cats have to play them on the road November 4th.
Hmm.
Back home with Towson November 11th, then the game at Delaware on November 18th. So there's two teams towards the bottom of the conference Villanova still has to play. You have a tough New Hampshire team sandwiched in the middle of that, and then you end at Delaware. So an intriguing schedule, to say the least, Mark. Obviously, the Cats have to take care of business against the teams below them in the standings, and the games with New Hampshire and Delaware could determine their fate.
By the way, good luck to the Villanova coaches to motivate the team for the game off the bye against a Stony Brook team that's 0-6, 0-4 right now. But that, to me, that's a perfect team off the bye. You get, you know, you hope that Villanova is able to make this game and have it end early. And then you're thinking New Hampshire, because that New Hampshire Villanova game is just going to be a monster matchup.
And on the other side of it, sometimes, and it doesn't always work this way, teams may be fresh coming out of the bye, but sometimes there's just a little bit of rust to shake off.
Yeah.
And again, you get a team that's at the bottom of the conference first. So maybe if you're just kind of getting your feet wet again, you can get that out of the way earlier. And as you said, take care of business against Stony Brook and maybe be in a position where you can get a comfortable lead, rest some players, and get ready for that big game against New Hampshire. But look, Mark, I don't think anyone in Villanova would have it any other way now with the schedule. We know last year wasn't the year Villanova wanted. A lot of people around campus had a good buzz about this team, feeling last year was just kind of an aberration. The depth in some positions, I think, has been better than we thought, and others have been as good as we thought. But I think if you did a position by position assessment where the Cats are, I think the coaches have to be very happy with what they've seen really across the board.
Yeah, I would go with the running game, the running backs. I would go with the offensive lineman. I think Watkins has been solid again. I don't think we've seen the best of Watkins, only because they haven't passed as much as maybe people anticipated they would. But in a game like last week, why would you pass when you can run the ball that way? So I think that's been fine. The linebackers have been great. Brandon Bell is having an all CAA type season. Hartzell's done a great job. He's only missed the one game, but he's their second leading tackler, and he's only off by one, and he missed the game. So they've been great. The secondary's been solid. I think, they've used a lot of defensive linemen. They're still looking for a little more push from the D line. But all in all, and the receivers have been solid. They just haven't had as many chances as everybody envisioned. So, uh, I look for the one thing I look for, Ed, in the final four games. I look for that passing game to take a step up, only because I look for them to have more opportunities coming up.
Mark, it's great to see the Cats in this position. They get a little time off. It's always a little weird on football Saturdays when you're not playing, and to be able to get up on a Saturday morning and say, "Wait a second, where's your normal game routine?" But the
Yeah.
Cats will get to get some time off. Obviously, they can keep an eye on some of the other teams in the conference, and they'll be back right after the bye week. It's a great position for the Cats to be in, and it should be exciting. And the Cats are off next week, but we are not, everybody. Just letting you know, as Mark alluded to with our special guest, we will be back next week. We'll talk about the last four games and the final push. We'll take a look back at what's going on this past week of the CAA as the Cats get ready for what should be a very interesting stretch drive. Mark, fun start for the season going into the bye. I wouldn't call it the second half of the season coming up. I call it the last chunk, but it should be very interesting. And we're excited to be back next week with This Week of Villanova Football to talk more about it.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about it, Ed, and we'll talk about FCS playoffs as well with Sam Herder. So we thank everybody for watching, and we'll see everybody next week.